It's all the same, like some things never change. I couldn't stop and say no. It's all the same, but you won't take the blame, even when you are blowing up. Oh my, you're my broken love. Nobody's gonna save her now. Oh my, you're my broken love. So come on, let me show you how. Oh my, you're my broken love. Oh my, you're my broken love. It's all the same, like some things never change. I couldn't stop and say no. It's all the same, but you won't take the blame, even when you are blowing up. Oh my, you're my broken love. Nobody's gonna save her now. Oh my, you're my broken love. So come on, let me show you how.
Close your eyes, only got one night. Just put your trust in me. Give me everything. I need your love tonight. So baby, please don't fight it. Put your trust in me. I'll give you everything. So hold on to me. Never let me go. Right here in your arms is where I wanna be. So hold on to me. Look me in the eyes, under the night sky for eternity. Never let me go. Right here in your arms is where I wanna be. So hold on to me. Look me in the eyes, under the night sky for eternity. Close your eyes, only got one night. Just put your trust in me. Give me everything. I need your love tonight. So baby, please don't fight it. Put your trust in me. I'll give you everything. So hold on to me. night sky for eternity.
Let's go. What? Here we go now. Batman scoop on the mic. Mix in the mix on the wheels of steel. This is what I was fucking born to do. Let's go.